We're going to be covering a very important topic, that is teaching in the modern university. There will be two parts to it. The first part will talk about what it means to teach in the School of Education in 2013 and the foreseeable future. And then we'll talk about that first job, and that is a little wide-ranging. It could have to do with, how to apply, what to expect, etc. All of you are here. We extended an invitation to everybody in the program, but I have specifically asked certain individuals to be here, mainly because they represent the gamut of students in the program. All have a connection to the program one way or the other, but they represent the gamut of, some of you will be teaching in a university for the first time, like the new ECFs in September. Others, like Wesley, has been an assistant professor for a number of years. He's been on search committees at Lehman College, and there's everybody in between. So we don't have a set program. There's no PowerPoints, anything of that sort. There's no presentations. I have a series of questions which are generic, and anyone can respond to them at any time. And you can ask questions at any time. But the first half, we're going to be looking more at what it means to teach in 2013 in the School of Education. And the second half will be more that first position. Those of you will be ECFs and teaching for the first semester in September. I see Carly here and Alexander. No, you're not. Okay, there's a couple of you here, but Manny, you're not teaching in No, okay. But some of you will be teaching for the first time. Some of you have never taught, but you might be applying for positions. We'll save that for the second half. So with that as an introduction, I think the first thing we should do is just introduce each other so we all know who we are.
I'm Kyla. I'm a second year urban ed student, and I'm teaching at Hunter College in the special ed department.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hessen. I'm also a second year in the urban ed program, and I'm teaching in the bilingual department, or the curriculum and teaching at Hunter College.
Hi, Manny Lopez, Middle Administrator, Bronx Community College.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a first year here in Graduate Center, and I'm teaching at Hunter at Curriculum and Teaching Department.
Hi, I'm Carly Hulsenbeck. I'm in cohort 12. I'm currently a field supervisor at Hunter, and I'll be teaching there next year.
I am Karim Ganji, physics at Queens College, in the Science, Math, and Technology program here, finishing up.
Hi, I'm Ferdinand Tajika. I'm cohort 12 in Science, Math, Technology program. I'll be teaching Queens College on fall 2013, sorry.
Hi, I'm Tahir. I'm second year here in the department, and I teach at Brooklyn College in the Political Science department.
Hi, I'm Steve Breyer. I'm a 40th year graduate student, and I teach urban ed here at the Graduate Center.
Hi, my name's Kirstin Green. I am in cohort 5, so this is my 8th year, and I'm graduating and starting an assistant professor position in literacy at SUNY New Paltz in the fall.
She's just defended her PhD this very afternoon.
Jeremy Greenfield, I'm a 4th year graduate student here in urban ed, and for the last 3 years I've been teaching Brooklyn College.
I'm Jeremy Benson. I'm a 6th year student here, and I teach in social foundations and curriculum and teaching at Hunter College.
Hi, my name is Wesley Pitts. I'm a graduate of the program. I am at my 6th year as assistant professor at Lehman College and also on faculty here at Urban Ed.
Oh, okay. I'm Jennifer Stoops. I'm in cohort 11 in the urban ed department, and I'm the social media fellow for the department.
And I'm Tony Picciano. I'm the executive officer for the PhD program in urban ed. Welcome all of you. And as I indicated, I hope this becomes a very informal discussion. There's nothing that you feel you can hold back. I mean, any question is welcome. Any response to any question is welcomed also. So when I had the idea for this project, and I think I talked with several of you, we've run various types of career nights as part of our annual repertoire of workshops and seminars and events we hold. This year we've done one on grantsmanship, which one Battle and I did about a month or so ago. And we thought that we usually have an event at about April. In the past it's been targeted specifically for the new Enhanced Chancellor Fellows. Jeremy Benson has been on the program several times in the past couple of years with me. And it was really specific questions, technical questions about what to expect in the first year as you go to a Hunter College or as a Brooklyn College or Queens College. And what kind of students you might have, what kind of programs you might be teaching in. And those kinds of questions are fine. If any of you, there's 3 or 4 of you who are ECFs and be having your first appointment next year, you can ask those questions, but I'd like to reserve those for the second hour. And the first hour, I thought, what I wanted to do as we've done this a couple of times, I wanted to have some broader view of what it means to be a professor in 2013 and the foreseeable future. So I wanted to broaden the topic a little bit tonight. And so I've asked some of you to be here because of your experience. All of you are connected with the Urban Ed program, with the exception of Steve and myself. All of you are or have been students in the program, and Steve and I teach in the program. So with that as a kind of introduction, let me just say that I think that this is my 44th year at City University of New York with a 3-year hiatus at SUNY New Paltz. But one of the things that has changed remarkably in that time, and I would even say in the last 10 or 12 years, particularly in the schools of ed, is the requirements for what you teach, how you teach, even to a degree who you're teaching to, that's going on in schools of education in 2013. For those of you who have any involvement with teacher education at any level, you know that there have been lots of requirements from the New York State Education Department that require you to look at your programs, make them more, I would say, applied than they ever were before. So it's not unusual to see that for even in graduate teacher ed programs, the number of electives are almost eliminated. There is a specific programmed instruction. You take this. You operate as a cohort throughout in some cases for 2 or 3 years. And so that's part of the prescription. And a lot of that did not generate from the faculty, who generally have quote unquote, owned the curriculum over the years. It's come from the outside, from mostly the New York State Education Department. And some of those requirements are fine, and some of those requirements have been questioned, without a doubt. But it's a different type of curriculum, I think, we're teaching in schools of ed than we did in the past. Also, who our students are. Typically, in the past, colleges set their admissions criteria. You needed a GPA to get into this if it was a graduate program. You even needed a GPA to get in some of the undergraduate programs. The students typically, if it was a graduate program, you may have to submit SATs. But that's changing too. If you look at a lot of our programs, and I would say City College, Brooklyn College, they have a lot of what we call teaching fellows programs, which have been incredibly popular, which the colleges are not really determining who the students are, but the New York City Department of Education is basically determining who the students are. And a lot of these students are second career students. They are students who've come from other environments. They've been in financial, military, mercantile type establishments, and for some reason they've been tapped they've applied, but they've also been selected to participate in these teaching fellows programs, which for the most part require a rather accelerated introduction to teaching. Most of these programs are designed to be done within a year and a half, maybe a little bit more. In many cases, a lot of the coursework starts in the summer, and the teaching fellows are placed into schools as early as September, which I would say in the more traditional curriculum or curriculums, that was almost unheard of. That typically you took your methods courses, you took your foundations courses for a year and a half, maybe more, before you went into a classroom. and that was typically a student teaching experience. So that's changed too. The nature of our students, the nature of our curriculum has changed. And the other thing which I think is important is that the demand on the part of the public, the policy agents, the taxpayers, is there's this incredible demand on accountability and assessment on what's going on in the schools. Those of you who teach in the school know better than I, there's almost a fanaticism in terms of the testing. You know, this week with the new change in the state education tests, you know, every day there have been articles in all the newspapers about all the anxiety on the part of the students, the teachers, the administrators, because New York State has recalibrated actually have changed, not just recalibrated, they've changed the nature of the tests to meet the Common Core requirements. And that's the age we live in, and that's not just unique to New York. You've heard me say this probably a number of times in the past. I've never seen the stars lined up where, you know, the New York City Department of Education, the New York State Education Department, the United States Department of Education, they're all aligned with the same goals, which requires, if nothing else, a lot more assessment and evaluation of student outcomes. I don't see any of that changing. It is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It is just what's happening in the world of education. So those kinds of themes are important to open up our discussion in terms of teaching in the modern university in 2013. There's one other element that is dear to my heart and Steve's heart, among others, and Kirstin's heart, among others, and that is the whole layer of technology that's happening, not just in education, but throughout our society, right? I mean, the internet wasn't here 20 years ago. Now no one can live without it. It is part of everything we do. I mean, look at how many laptops are open here, you know, and I hope you're not just checking your email and ignoring it, but you're doing something, you're keeping notes, and you're going to share it with your colleagues or whatever. But we can't escape it. It's a basic part of who we are and what we are now as a society, and that's integrating itself into what we do as teachers and what our students do as learners. Some of you have already done some online coursework. You know that if you teach in CUNY, and this is not unique to CUNY, it's existing in most of the colleges. Once you're assigned a course to teach, you're going to have a Blackboard website, and you're supposed to, you know, populate it with your assignments, your readings as best you can, your assessments, et cetera, et cetera. If you really want to become an online teacher, you develop techniques to develop discussions, you use wikis to collaborate, you use blogs for reflection, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all there. And that is integrating more and more what you're teaching and learning. I don't want to get distracted and talk about MOOCs because then I won't stop talking for 3 hours, but that's a whole other topic. The other aspect of technology which is permeating, especially here in New York State, some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, there's a big push that all certification of teachers over the next 2 or 3 years, there will be a requirement that a video demonstration of your lesson has to be submitted in order to get certification. So a student has, I think it's like a 15 or 20-minute video, I can't remember the exact time frame. But in order to be certified, in addition to everything else, you have to now submit a video demonstrating your ability to teach in front of a class. That has lots of implications for the teachers of the teachers, because now you have to prepare the students and help them with that. There's the technical aspect of having a video in a classroom, but it's a whole other thing to use it in terms of helping someone improve their teaching and learning. That's the concept behind it. It isn't
What's
just
the requirement, Tony? Where did that come from?
came from the State Education Department. It started when my dear colleague David Steiner was the Commissioner of Education, who has believed in this for years. He implemented it at Hunter College I would say about 5 years ago, but it will now be a state requirement. There's a couple of other I'm sorry?
Are you talking about K-12 teachers? Or
K-12, yeah.
I had to submit a video in 2005 or 7.
So the requirements for the new video and like the accompanying documentation that the students have to do are a lot more complex.
Yeah.
Remember they were talking about phasing it out?
Yeah. Well, it's gone. Wesley, do you know anything about this?
Yeah. Just to say, it's part of what is called the EdTPA.
Yes.
So the EdTPA now came from Stanford University, Pearson has the contract. Pretty much students have to do what is called an e-portfolio. And so e-portfolio pedagogy is going to be a really strong part of what you need to be able to interface with. And even thinking about video, having students think about notions of oversampling their video so that they can have enough video to select from. And the video is not necessarily the heart of the matter for many of our students. What's going to be the heart of the matter is how students are trained to write and describe what happened in the classroom. So the literacy component is going to be really what passed or failed the student. And so that's really, I think, something that's coming down.
And CUNY just last year received, I think, a $5 or $7 million grant from the New York State Education Department to start looking at your curriculum so you can implement this plus other things, including the Common Core, into the teacher ed curriculum. So it will have an influence on what you do as teacher educators. And CUNY is now, and actually it's not just CUNY, CUNY is, and it's a partner with the private colleges in the New York City area, and they have, I believe it's a $7 million grant to do professional development of college professors in terms of how they can integrate some of these requirements into their curriculum. That's going on now, just so you're aware of it. So with that as introduction, let me throw out a question, and those of you anyone who feels they want to comment on this, I think feel free. I think one of the issues, how many of you teach or have experience teaching in K-12? Okay, so a bunch of you. So that serves you well as pedagogues, right? I think good teachers, you need to organize your material, you need to be prepared, you think about what might excite your students and however you prepare them for their lessons, or what you do during the lessons, and that will serve you well as a basis as you move forward in your college careers. But I had learned something a few years back, and I would say this is a good 20 years or so ago, that there is difference when you're teaching adults. And so I would throw that out as a first question to anyone who wants to respond. For those of you who've been teaching a while, and we have Wesley here, and Kareem was just made Teacher of the Year at Adjunct of the Year?
Yes.
Yeah, Kareem was just named Adjunct of the Year at Queens College. Don't be shy. He was, and Queens College isn't a small school, about 500 or 600 students. It's got about 16,000, 17,000, 18,000 students, and probably employs about 500 adjuncts. And Kareem was the adjunct faculty member of the year. So congratulate you, Kareem. But those of you who have been teaching for a little bit, I would just throw that first question out. Do you see a difference in teaching adults? Is there something else you feel you need to do or you don't need to do? Is it you just bring in your experiences in your K-12 environments? Anybody would like to? Don't be shy now. I would hate to have to call on you, but I will. Kareem.
Since I'm on the spot, I might as well.
Thank you.
That's fine. I have actually the best of two worlds. I finished teaching 11th, 12th grade physics, AP with calculus at the high school, then run to Queens College. Yes, I do see a difference between teaching high school, even the very gifted kids on the high school level, and college students. I use my physics classroom pretty much like a methods course. One of my courses that I teach is physics for pre-service elementary teachers. It's called conceptual physics. Extremely passionate about that course. Difference in teaching adults, it's at times kind of funny and sad that the adults we teach at a university, they come in with still that mental attitude going back to the high school, like what extra credit do I have and things of that nature. There are always those challenges, they seem to fall back on wanting to get all that extra. So over 20 years now, I think I've changed quite a bit and have built recently a lot of technology to support their learning, brought in plenty of technology to make sure that it's all part of learning experience, as opposed to the high school where you teach, you get them ready for either the AP exams, the state regents exams. Here, put incorporate several exams, but at the same token, build a component where they can't go wrong. They get several tries and they build so that this way they're not waiting for their extra credit help to push them. Try to figure those things. There have been major challenges. Even to this day, I've given, just this past week, I've had students on Sunday showing, what can I do now? I failed the last exam and things of that nature. So you have to figure out a way, because to constantly going back to that old thing of the extra credit, which is the sad thing that begins in K through 12 education, it carries over, and I don't know how to change that, and that's a big challenge.
Good. Anybody else?
And I think along similar lines, but slightly different, is that I found that one of the challenges, I think, is if you are looking to do sort of like a critical pedagogy or like a democratic kind of participatory classroom, a lot of times the students in the adult students in the class are even more thoroughly kind of socialized into kind of top-down or kind of authoritarian teacher-student relationships. And so when you try to kind of democratize things in the classroom, not only for the sake of their learning, but also to model how to do that kind of pedagogy, sometimes you face a resistance that you wouldn't expect, I think, because they just have had so much more exposure to traditional forms of pedagogy. So that's something.
I have a question rather than a pearl of wisdom. Is that appropriate?
Related to adults?
Yeah. So just in my background, I taught high school, now I'm teaching adults. And just as an example, let's say Jeremy was my high school student, and he wasn't a strong writer. He turned in something that wasn't so good. I have no problem letting that student know that, letting Jeremy know that, right? Because my feeling is we're getting together, we're getting to know one another over the course of an entire year. We establish that relationship, and hopefully that student knows that I have the best interest. And one of the things that I haven't figured out the best way to do that same kind of thing with adults, that really, especially knowing that some of these adults, are going to be teachers themselves, if they're not already, and trying to give them critical feedback, being very honest to them, but in such a way that they'll take it. So if anyone had any thoughts about that, I think that'd be helpful.
There was a person, his name is Malcolm Knowles. Do any of you know him? You don't have to know him unless you're interested in adult education, but in the 1950s he used to write, we all used the word pedagogy. Pedagogy, if you look at the language, it has to do with child learning. He developed this whole theory of adult learning, which he called andragogy, A-N-D-R-A-G-O-G-Y. And to relate to your question, Jeremy, what he felt was, he had like 9 guidelines, but one of the important things that he said was that you have to understand that children do not bring as much to the table when you're teaching them as adults do. Adults bring a lifetime of experiences. They think they know a lot. I think it was Kareem was saying that, or maybe, I'm not sure, or maybe Jeremy, that they feel they know a lot about things, and they have experiences, much more than children. And what he said is that you try and tap into those experiences if you can, to make whatever topic you're teaching relevant to their lives. And in that way, if you use that as the basis, you can be critical. Listen, you can be a better teacher if you do this, that, and whatever. But you relate it to their experiences as best you can. If you're allowing them to express themselves, have them express their experiences in conjunction with the question. And I'll give you an example. I've taught online courses at Hunter College in the school leadership program, but it would work in a regular class also. If I don't like to talk for an hour and a half or 2 hours. I like to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I like to ask questions. And sometimes it's a good question, and people raise their hands, or they respond on the discussion board or the blog, whatever I'm using. Other times it doesn't go anyplace. But I've always found that if I felt that it was a slowness in the discussion, whether online or face-to-face, all I had to do was preface the question with, in your school, have you observed this? Or have you seen this? And all of a sudden, people were able to relate their experiences. So I would suggest that as one technique. Think of the fact and respect the fact that adults bring lots of experience to their classwork, and tap into that as helping them to become better teachers, and see if that works. And in a way, you can quote unquote be critical, but you're helping them to become better teachers rather than being critical of them. Possible way of approaching that. Any other questions or comments? Kirstin.
A couple things. Well, one, I was thinking I don't know if this is fair to say, if it's if it's a generalization, if other people agree or whatever, but I found sometimes grad students can be a little more, let me frame it this way. There's something different between teaching young kids math and science and literacy and teaching adults how to teach. There's something very different in the content that we're looking at. And so I think that distinction is also important, because sometimes what I was going to say is that sometimes I found that graduate students, as opposed to undergrads that are learning how to become teachers, are a little more confident in what they think they know about how classrooms run. And I think sometimes there's this understanding, particularly as adults, that people think, oh, well, I've gone through class, I've gone through school, of course I know how to teach. We all know how to teach. And there's this we have to be very explicit about what pedagogy is when we're teaching it in the classroom to adults. So that's just one thought I wanted to throw out there, but also that there are many similarities too, that I think come up around teaching children and adults. And I'm thinking about just the way that from the first moments of my graduate program, I remember I was taking classes in my teacher ed program in a school, similar to how you're running your classes, Kareem, and looked up and saw a poster on the wall that said "to with by," and at the time I didn't have any idea what that meant, but we would later find out that it meant you teach 2 students, then you practice it with them, and then you let them try it out by themselves, right? A very sort of basic progressive idea of teaching that we've probably all learned in some iteration in our teacher ed classes. But that is very applicable at any level of education, I think, and I try, whether I'm approaching teaching a class of 3rd graders, of 12th graders, of undergrads or graduates, to have those 3 components in my lesson no matter what level. So I think there's something to be said for the similarities too.
I wanted to just, go ahead, Wesley, please.
I think it's important, certainly at Lehman, we see the gamut of people. We had TFA, we had fellows, we have what we call traditional students. And I think what's important is, and it's also important in K through 12, is to teach the students that are in front of you, not the students you imagine that are in front of you. And I think that that's important.
Did you have a comment, Sarah?
I did. Thinking about how is teaching different in K through 12 versus the university, I think it's also worth considering what assumptions do we bring about how it's different to teach adults. And I think that it's even more of a continuum. Teachers who are in K to 2 classrooms don't feel that they have very much in common with teachers who are in 9 to 12 classrooms and vice versa. They come out of very different schools of thought or histories, right? So there's a gap even between elementary school and middle school, and right, there's this idea that middle school teachers look back and say, like, they should have known this in elementary school, and there's this gap of knowledge that for some reason we're not communicating it to each other. And then the same thing happens in high school, and I think that we slowly develop an assumption not only about what students don't know, but also what they do know or should know, that then informs how we teach in the classroom. So it kind of also goes back to your question of how do I give feedback on a student's paper, and I think there's a lot of, there's a common belief in university level teaching that if I'm teaching a science class or an education class, it's not my job to develop the student as a writer, that should be a skill that they already come with, or it's not my job to teach a student grammar, that's a skill they should already come with. So I think that's part of the equation, as well as looking across grade levels.
Thank you, Sarah. Something that Sarah alluded to, and I think Kirstin said directly, that when you, and for those of you who may be teaching soon, and I'll say the Chancellor Fellows or any of any of you who may be starting out as adjuncts or what have you. I have found that there was always a difference between teaching undergraduates and graduate students. The undergraduates, going back to what I was saying about Malcolm Knowles, they don't bring as much to the table as graduate students. And undergraduates, they know about teaching and learning from their own experience as undergraduates. They were not teachers in the K-12 because in most public school systems, you cannot be a teacher if you haven't got a college degree, an undergraduate degree. So they don't have a whole lot of experience as teaching in schools. Graduate students, though, that could be very different. We've made several comments about teaching fellows. Most of them will have had no experience teaching in a school. My own experience with them is that they want to know what they have to do as teachers. And if they're in one of the accelerated programs where they're going to take a couple of courses for 6 weeks in July and August and then be in the classroom in September, they very quickly want to know what they have to do to survive and literally survive in the classroom. So they're going to be pushing you to, what do I need to know? They're interested in the methods courses, less interested in the foundation courses, particularly in those first couple of courses. If you've got a traditional program, and Wesley mentioned a traditional program, those students will already, if they're going for a master's degrees, the bulk of them may already be teachers. And so you can go back and tap into their experiences. Of course, you get the provisional certification, which your undergraduate degree, and you get your permanent certification, which your graduate degree, right? That model is not just New York, it's common throughout many states in the country. So who you're teaching can be different. And so undergraduates are different than graduates. I have found that at the graduate level, traditional graduate students in teacher ed are different than teaching fellows programs. So just be aware of that. Any other comments or questions about this issue of teaching adults?
In terms of helping students to develop their writing skills, because we see that throughout. One of the things that I do is I tap into, if you have a writing center in the school, I do that. And I do at a particular point where perhaps a student has submitted several drafts and it still needs major work, then that's the point where I would ask the student to go to the writing center, and I think that's important. In looking at what we call teacher fellows type program, which are alternate cert programs, the thing is that when and usually those are students that have, like Tony has said, they have completed their undergraduate degree. They may be very new to New York City and the urban environment and what that really means in yes, a critical way. I think that when students, it's good if your program mixes the students. So for instance, we had teacher fellows, and they did not like us to mix the fellows with let's say a student who, another group of students who are already teaching but are coming back for their master's, or maybe a second master's in science education or something like that. And I think that's probably one of the Achilles heels of those type of alt-cert that just demands isolation, okay? So if you can build on the different experiences, and if you're able to do that, and if you can advocate to the department to do it, that could be an important avenue also.
I had been the literacy coach at the school where I taught the year before, and I was 7 years ago, so much younger, and many of my students were my age or a little older. And so one of the things I think to consider too when you're teaching adults, when you are an adult who's new at it, is having humility. And that was one of the things that I had to learn very quickly as a literacy coach who was young and had been at the school for very few years. Just being willing to admit, I don't know anything, but I can certainly help you in some way. In that case, as an out-of-classroom personnel, figure out what you need to get help with. But as an instructor of teachers, applying that same sort of I don't have all the answers, and sort of walking that line between being the authority in the classroom and also recognizing and acknowledging that we're all in this project of education together is an important piece to bring to the teacher ed classroom, I think.
I have a skill, just a technique that I use, is that I start very, let's say teacher-centered, and by the middle of the semester on, all of a sudden they're tricked into it being very student-centered. All of a sudden they look around and it's like, you mean we're driving the assignments now? So that is that if for instance when you do start with adults that want to be told, okay, when is the assignment due? What is the assignment, so forth, that if you try to, okay, you begin that way, very syllabus-centered, assignment-centered, then all of a sudden, gradually, you're moving into a more student-centered approach. And you don't have to even say that. You just do it. And hopefully, it'll work well.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on another topic. And I mentioned it briefly, but maybe we could spend some time, any of you want to say or comment on it. And that has to do with the whole impact of assessments. I mean, for those of us who were teaching in the 1990s, assessments were faculty determined. They were a little bit more than whatever grades we wanted to give on papers or whatever test we use. No one on the outside told us how we do an assessment. No one told us what the objectives were for our courses. Some schools do that, but many of the CUNY schools, there's a long tradition of academic freedom that, okay, there's an outline for a course, there's a general description of the course, but frequently the faculty had the prerogative to develop the course as he or she saw fit, what the books were assigned, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that has changed in the last, particularly I would say the last 12, 13 years, where assessments have now become dominant in a lot of what we do in our classes in teacher ed. I'll give you an example. I taught for 20 some odd years at Hunter College. My main assignment was in teacher education in the ed leadership program, but I also taught social studies education. I taught education technology, both graduate, undergraduate. I taught social foundations, both graduate and undergraduate also. So I was involved with about 4 or 5 programs. I assure you, in every one of those programs, I determined what books we were going to read, whether it was undergraduate or graduate, whether it was a foundations course or a more advanced, ed policy course in the ed leadership graduate program. I determined every book to read. I established every assignment I was going to use. That is not quite the same world that a lot of teacher educators find themselves in today. There are assessments that in some cases you have to do. If you're not familiar, there's an organization called NCATE that now in New York State they are considered the accrediting agents for teacher education programs. They come in every, I think 7 years it is, or 5 years, 5 to 7 years, and they come in with a list of what each of your programs should have, each of your education programs should have, and then they establish basically what are your assessments for this course, and this course. Which means if Wesley and I are teaching social foundations, and they've established the assessments, not the syllabus, the assessment for those courses, it's quite possible that Wesley and I have to get together and compare what we're teaching and how we're teaching to make sure we're both meeting those assessments. Prior to that type of environment, I didn't have to talk to Wesley. I like Wesley. I might talk to him, let's say, about how's things going, let's go have a drink. But I didn't have to tell him how I'm teaching. He didn't have to tell me how he's teaching. That might be good, it might be bad. We could have that discussion. But now we're almost forced to talk about what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. And a lot of schools are moving towards, I would say, a certain amount of standardization of the curriculum in terms of what's going on in teacher education. If we want to take it at a broader scope and move beyond teacher education, we could talk about the whole project that's going on in CUNY now with Pathways, which is, Pathways is really not to do with teacher education, it really has to do with the basic requirements, distribution requirements, core requirements of an undergraduate degree, where CUNY is basically moving towards a standardization of that. I don't want to spend too much time on that because that'll get us off on a tangent. But in teacher education, this has become common. And I don't know that that's going to change anytime in the near future. For those of you who've had a chance to teach, particularly if you had to teach a key assessment course, which is a course that's designated, or courses that are designated in each program, where you have to collect your samples and submit that to someone in the department or the program who's going to keep this file for the next generation of an accreditation visit by NCATE, you have to really follow some script in order to get those assessments to where you want them to be. But I'll just throw that out as an issue. Wesley, maybe you can talk about this?
Yes. I've prepared about 4 NCATE reports, so I know it well. And just to nuance it a little bit, it's really, because I'm in the let's say secondary education, and it's what is called a SPA. So you have the big NCATE that'll assess the unit being the school or division of education, whichever you have, and then individually, for instance, science is assessed by NSTA, the National Science Teacher Association. So that's their SPA, and that's really where those assessments are going to come from. And it's English, I think it's, math is NCTM, and English there's NCTE. So you need to, I think it's important to be familiar with those things, because that is invariably in all of the searches that I've been on, a question. Okay, and if familiarity with NCATE or some aspect of NCATE, and I would say that going in, just be careful. I would say to new people coming in, and adjuncts, that they don't dump on you, meaning that, okay, you're new, okay, you're going to help us do NCATE. But sometimes they assign you NCATE right away. When I was hired, the dean told me, oh, perfect, no problem. We just finished our NCATE unit evaluation. We passed. Okay, fine. Now I get in, my first day is like, oh, by the way, here's your SPA report. You guys didn't pass 8 of the 10 standards. All right, so now then it's our job to deal with that, right? So it is important that you don't blow off, as Tony said, any kind of requests made by any of the faculty there about, okay, you need to produce these assessments as part of your course that you're teaching. So it's very important to know when it's due, in what form it's due, that you assess it, and just what is the nature and the format that they want. And that's, I think, key, because that's a very good way, ignoring that is a very good way of pissing off your dean.
Something you don't want to do.
So I think, just to add to that, I think as an adjunct, it's really important to be proactive about that, because you're not necessarily told all the time. So I don't have a key assessment in my course, but I teach a course on assessment, and ironically, we do not have an assessment. But I did have a particular curriculum that I was supposed to teach that I was not told about until about halfway through the semester, in the first semester. So I think just being proactive about the things that you're supposed to do before you get your syllabus and before you start teaching your class is important.
Just really quick. I think Nick Michelli still teaches this class, but the course Educating Educators, if you haven't already taken it, I think we took the same year, the first year he offered it, and I just learned so much about the accreditation processes, because there's so many different institutions, and it really unpacked the mystery of that for me. So that's another way of learning more about it.
To say too, I think along the lines of what Leslie was saying, that the better you know if you have a key assessment and you know beforehand what it is, there's also ways to find wiggle room within it to find spaces for increasing your academic freedom in spite of the constraints of the key assessment. So that it doesn't have to dictate entirely everything that you do, but at the same time you can do your key assessment and you're doing a good job and everything looks good, but at the same time looking within it for the spaces where you can tailor it, like we were talking before about, like, the knowledge and the interests and the capacities that your students bring into the classroom. There are ways that you can really draw on those and kind of wiggle around, I think, within the key assessments, at least in my experience with the ones that I've had to administer.
Okay, so far I feel like I'm the only one out of the education program teaching the science in the physics department. With this pre-service, the course I teach for pre-service elementary education teachers, I don't have any per se guidelines as to what content I have to teach. I know it's the physics department. I pretty much developed the entire course and things of that nature, but what I've taken into account is I've gone through the elementary education examinations and things like that. What do they need to know in science, mathematics? And as Sarah earlier mentioned that, not to consider what prior knowledge they come in with. So I make sure that I build the math part into it. I build the science part into it. So most of my assessments are built actually on knowing what the students, after they enter the elementary education program, when they're ready for their state exams and things of that nature, what will they face? What are the science requirements? I've gone through the state standards, and most of my curriculum is based on the state standards. So in a way, from a department completely outside of education, wishing to make a difference on teachers. So I've taken that perspective and I use, questions that I feel are important for them to understand concepts and that they will carry. And I've had, thank goodness, students after years have sent emails, that they took an exam and they remembered F is equal to MA or whatever it was. It's nice. And so for me, and that's the part of that course. The other course I teach is physics for computer science and engineering majors, and it's a complete, it's again, in my department, I have the freedom to choose the text, to write my exams, and it's like night and day between those two. That's at least that's my approach.
Just a quick question: the final exams in your department, are those departmental or are they?
Depends on the course. Depends on the course. There's another course that I teach normally in the summers, physics for pre-med students. That's a department kind of thing. We know exactly. We've set as a committee, developed the curriculum, the syllabus based on the MCAT examination, things of that nature. So we do have a question bank that we share amongst faculty. There's another course that is physics for track physics courses for engineers or physics majors or chem majors. Those are departmental too. But we still do have the liberty of putting our own questions together.
I want to tackle one of Tony's questions that I've been thinking about in terms of what does it mean to teach in an urban life, urban university system in 2013. I think what draws to mind, particularly if you're teaching in secondary ed, which I do, the type of interdisciplinarity that you will encounter. And I know a lot have been written about interdisciplinarity, theoretically and so forth, but I'll take it from a more practical end. Karim indicated that he teaches in the physics, but what I've noticed is that in secondary ed, you have to also interact with the content disciplines. So for me, for science, I have to interact with, we have geology, we have chemistry, we have physics, and so forth. So we interact with those departments in terms of the certification requirement. And I think that it is important that you're able to reach out and make some kind of friends and inroads. Sometimes you'll have a joint appointment between both. And that's true also when I was on the search committee for a history faculty member, that we had, well, it was probably more social foundations, but we had a history, the chair of the history department on the search committee, because it would be that kind of interdisciplinary interaction between the history and also our secondary ed. And what I also find is that college, we go through middle states, So Middle States now is the college accreditation body up here. There are others in different parts of the country. And what happens is that the science content people and some others panic because now at Middle States they want rubrics, they want all the things that we do for NK. Now the science people have to do. The pure science people have to do. And now they're asking, they come knocking on, that's the time now, they're knocking on your door. They're not avoiding you on campus, and they want some help in revising, looking at their syllabus so they can get through Middle States. So I think that certainly interdisciplinarity is something that we can tap into.
Okay. Jeremy, and then I want to just sum up this part of the discussion and move on to something else.
I wanted to tap into that notion of interdisciplinarity. Over the past 3 years, the class I've taught a lot of Brooklyn colleges writing across the curriculum, and my students are primarily practicing teachers, secondary teachers, or teachers in training who are going to work in the secondary classroom. And they're all disciplines except English, right? So I'll have phys ed teachers in there, I'll have science, math, social studies, art, what have you. And one of the things that I've noticed is I actually have a great deal of freedom in terms of my syllabus, but in terms of keeping it student-centered over the course of the past 3 years and teaching it almost every semester, I've really adapted the syllabus a lot to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of all the students. So my first semester, talking about the importance of incorporating writing in the classroom and having 7 phys ed teachers sitting out there saying, what do you mean writing in the classroom? It really made me think about how to orient this and keep the disciplines, interconnected.
Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move on to another topic. Let me just put two knots on this discussion of assessment outcomes and accreditation. I think Kirstin mentioned, for those of you in the program who you saw the coursework, we offer electives just about every or seminars every semester. Many of them are new. We offer them once, we may not offer again for another 2 or 3 years. But one seminar we offer every single year is the Educating Educators. And it's specifically for the reasons that Kirstin mentioned. Nick Michelli, who has had an incredible experience in terms of an administrator and a faculty member in education, he also has been a major fixture with the NCATE accreditation. He does several every year. So if you're interested in this topic, I think it's a good, worthwhile course to take, particularly for those of you who are early in your program. You have a lot of coursework to do. The other thing I want to mention, and I didn't think about it until Wesley commented, a lot of what's happening in teacher education is moving into the other disciplines. I mentioned to you Pathways, which is a CUNY initiative, but I've been a Middle States accreditor since 1983. I usually do 1 or 2 a year, and it's moving in all the disciplines. In some ways, education is ahead of the curve, for better or for worse. That's another debate. But I want to touch on 2 other topics which I think are evolving and will have more of a play in the future. The issues we've discussed so far, I think they are here and now. In terms of the future, I think there are 2 things that are happening that will happen even more. One is we're going to see a lot of requirements for field-based teacher education. That the days of taking courses and then you took your student teaching in the senior year or at the end of the program, that is disappearing. We're going to see a lot of push, and it's starting already, that more and more of the teaching of all of those basic courses, a lot of that have a field component. That is, you go into the field and you teach them. And if it's something that a teacher should learn, or a prospective teacher should learn, they should be practicing it right away. They should go into the school and learn about it and do whatever it is they have to do. So we're going to see a lot more of field-based education coming to not just teacher education, but a kind of clinical model. That is that the teacher educators are in the field with the students, and they're teaching everything from their basic foundation courses to some advanced methods course, but they're doing it in the field. We're going to see a lot more of that. The other thing which relates to the technology, and a couple of you I know are leaving at 6 o'clock, which I didn't mention. I mentioned online learning and video. The other area, which is part of this grant, of this $5 to $7 million grant from the State Education Department for the schools of education in and around New York City, to look to see if they revamp their curriculum, it has to do with data-driven decision-making. This is if you're not familiar with it, this has been coming for a while, but this is basically a kind of, it's one thing for the teacher to assess, what little Johnny, what little Janie are doing, but we're moving quickly to a system where, a lot of little Johnny and little Janie's performance is being monitored, usually through some electronic or computer means, and that more and more you're going to be getting data that comes to you from some type of what we could, the generic term for this is data-driven decision-making or learning analytics type program, where there is something analyzing what Johnny's doing on assessments and what have you. That is edging itself in. I think in another few years we're going to see a lot more of it. And part of this grant that I was talking to you about, which is for all of the schools of ed in the city of New York, there's a component of that that has to do with data-driven decision-making. That is for the faculty who are teaching teachers to become more familiar with some of the New York City Department of Education's databases where the core of the system is being built. ARIS.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
actually, I think there's a Wesley mentioned ARIS, which was developed about 6 or 7 years ago. It was about an $80 million project. I understand that right now there's several companies, including Gates. I'm surprised. I'm sorry to hear left, but his company and there's several others involved with it. Rupert Murdoch is involved with it. Pearson is involved with it. But they're looking to develop a major database system that will be not just citywide, not just statewide, but be national system. And I think the expense is put at about $300 to $400 million. I think there are 8 states involved in the pilot for this. New York State is one of those. So I think that's something else to look to in terms of the future. More field-based work and more data-driven decision-making a la learning analytics. I think we're going to see more of that in the next 5 to 7 years. Okay, I want to change direction a little bit now. The other part of this evening or this event was to take a look at applying or teaching for the first time in a school of education. Now, I'm going to ask someone in particular I'm going to ask Kirstin to comment because she's fresh off interviews and what have you. But some of you, Wesley has a position and he's very successful at Lehman College. He's developing a wonderful reputation there. The rest of you have not begun that full-time career yet, but Kirstin is ready to embark on it in September. And so Kirstin, if you don't know, Kirstin not only successfully developed her dissertation, defended her dissertation this afternoon, but she also has been offered an accepted position as an assistant professor at SUNY New Paltz. So what I'd like Kirstin to do is just go through a little bit of that process that went through what was important to you, what you think worked, what didn't work, or whatever. I know that wasn't the only interview you went on, so maybe you can give some insight to our prospective assistant professors here.
Sure. And I'm happy to answer, we all have perspectives on this, but I'm happy to answer specific questions too if they come up. But in terms of the job market is a very scary, sort of overwhelming, intangible thing. And I think when so many of us have taught in New York City, lived in New York City for a long time, the idea of not getting a job in New York City when we step out of this institution is a little overwhelming. So that's the first thing that I would say. You just kind of have to let that go in some sense because there just aren't enough jobs for every PhD that needs one. And you have to sort of play the field and be willing to do that in some sense. So that was my first, it was important to me to be close to New York if I could, but I realized that I didn't have that much of a choice ultimately. So I did, to some extent, limit my applications geographically. But I would also say it was very helpful when Jean sat me down in the fall and said, if you don't put any applications in, you're not going to get a job, right? And it was sort of I needed to be like hit over the head with that in some way because it's true. The job market begins in August for the following September. And I didn't really understand that. until maybe last year. And so that's something to really think about too. So when you're approaching your final year of the PhD program, you're also applying for jobs. Some people focus on finishing their dissertation and then they apply for jobs. And so depending on what your situation is, that, you know, if you have an income that year or if you're able to sustain yourself for an additional year, that might be an approach to do it one at a time. For me, I found it very motivating in the last couple of months, especially as I put out applications. I was very excited to get a couple of interview offers, and ended up, because of that, I had 3 on-campus interviews, and because of that, ended up having to push back my dissertation. And so it became a little bit of a tricky, leapfrogging experience. But when I was offered the position, I was over the moon, and that was an incredibly motivating moment to be like, oh yes, I'm finishing my dissertation. And everybody says you sort of get this like push at the final end to finish your dissertation. It just comes to you, and that never really came to me. But I think because I've been chewing on this material for 8 years, that it's sort of just been coming out all along. But I guess, so some of the pieces of advice would be, start on that cover letter now, literally. I mean, be thinking about what are some things that make you the scholar and educator that you are and want to be. Make sure that when you're applying and writing and crafting your letter, there will be a core letter, right? When we all, applied to college, we were working with the same essay and sort of tailoring it to different institutions. You do sort of the same thing in that sense. But also, it's time consuming producing your materials. And I had not put together a CV. I mean, I've been keeping my CV sort of up to date. When we apply for fellowships here, you always have to submit one, but that was not in good shape. So be thinking about that too. Every time you speak, every time you attend an event and you're a part of it, you're contributing in some way. Write all of that down. Every committee position that you have, everything that you participate in, it counts for something, and the committee is looking for that. They want to know, what is your teaching experience, what is your research experience, and what is your service experience. And those 3 components are taken very seriously in the job search. And I'm sure Wesley can talk about this from the other perspective too, being on the other side of the table. What worked and what didn't, be yourself, 110%. I think that was the thing that helped me the most. I was incredibly nervous. The way it worked for me is I had phone call interviews first and then on campus. And it's overwhelming for the first time to be on the phone with 5 or 6 other people on a conference call trying to be yourself, while you're at home doing whatever you're doing. But it was also great to have that experience and go to campus and have to present my research and my ideas as practice for my dissertation defense, to be honest. So the 2 things, as I see it, the finishing your defense and getting a job, and maybe that's the way it worked out for me, I saw those things as very linked and intertwined, and they sort of motivated each other in a way. So I'm sure there's so many things that I'm skipping over, and I had so many questions about how does this all work? What is an assistant versus associate versus full professor? Tons and tons of questions, and I'd be happy to, I don't know that I have any silver bullet or, anything to share other than some luck, and hopefully, I put out what I've been doing here for 8 years and some people liked it, but yeah, I'm happy to answer specific questions if you have them.
Let me just make a couple of comments. I think I had asked Kirstin to prepare a little bit of that. Let me just talk about the process. Kirstin indicated that she wasn't sure why things happen in September. There's a real reason for it. Most colleges work on a fiscal year that starts on July 1, ends on June 30th. So the finances of the college for any given year, they're settled in July and August. And that's when they typically will send out to the whoever the financial vice president is or whatever, they'll send out to the departments in and around the summer, towards the latter part of the summer, okay, you have these new positions, you can hire these people. They also generally will give you permission, have to give you permission in terms of filling existing vacancies. They may say, well, we're not filling it this year with a full-time position, you can hire adjuncts. Or they may say, yes, you can hire a full-time person in that. So most of the department chairs or deans of education in this case, they have their budgets finalized around August, early September. So once they know what positions they can offer, then they start posting them in various different forums, the Chronicle of Higher Education, AERA, or whatever, and they say, okay, we're looking for assistant professors, or associate professors, or full professors. most of you, matter of fact, none of you graduating here, and whether it's this year or next year or the year after, you will not be, your CV will not even be looked at if they're looking for an associate or a full professor. You have to apply for assistant professorships. Where it sometimes gets a little bit confusing is to say assistant or associate professor.
Open rank.
Yeah, or open rank, which is really complex because you may be going against a full professor who has all kinds of credentials and has a CV that has 20 years of fine experience, and you have to decide what you want to do with that open rank. The privates, to me, have a lot more flexibility with that than the publics, because the privates they basically operate on a kind of more on I would say a cash basis than the publics. The publics operate on, you have a position, that position is, it doesn't matter whether it's an assistant professor, an associate professor, or a full position, that's the position you have. Whereas the privates would say, well, we're assigning $80,000 for this position. If they can get 2 assistant professors for $40,000, they might do that. Whereas the publics would never do that. They just don't have the flexibility in their accounting system to do that. So that's an important issue in terms of what the level of the position is. And then, so they advertise in September, October, November, and then they'll put together a committee. Rarely is the decision made by an individual. There's almost always a committee that's dominated by faculty. It doesn't mean that the faculty will have the final say, but they generally recommend to a chair, and the chair may recommend to a dean. But usually there's at least 2 interviews and maybe 3. So they'll start interviewing in the winter. Let's say they have 50 applications. They'll look at those and they'll call 12 in for an interview. They'll interview those 12. They'll narrow those 12 down to 5 or 6. And they'll call you for another interview, maybe on the phone and maybe in person. They'll narrow those 5 or 6 down to 2 or 3. And usually when it's to 2 or 3, you'll ask to come on campus at that point in time. Frequently to do either a demo lesson or to do a presentation of some scholarly paper. That's up to the discretion of the search committee. So that's the kind of process. That process of, narrowing it from 50 to 12, 12 to 6, 6 to 2 or 3, usually takes about 3 months. So now you're into the early spring, March, April, and that's when they start. They will make their decision typically by June.
No one wants to go back.
No one wants to go back. The faculty don't want to be there in the summertime. So they'll make their decision.
It's also now like 600 applicants.
Yeah,
It's like,
well, but in any case, yeah, it is growing. And so that's the process. It's typically takes about 10 months, starting in September, ending at the end of May. Jeremy, you had a question about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Comment?
You go first. This would be for Kirstin and Wesley, is it also? Did you, I'm wondering if you prepared a job talk, and if so, what'd you do?
And I was just furiously sitting here jotting what the sort of general documents are too that are expected. So I had three different types of presentations were required. The first one was a teaching presentation only. So I had to teach an undergraduate course of student teachers, or they were learning to become teachers but weren't in the classroom yet, they're undergrads, any topic on literacy. And so that was great. It was a really wonderful first stab at that because it wasn't a scary job talk, which can be overwhelming. And the second one was to speak on any topic in education. And so I did a 45-minute presentation sort of weaving together some of my interests in education and my work and experience. And the third one was both a teaching presentation and a job talk. So there are variations. Do you want to answer this too? And then I'll come back to the document thing.
Okay. So in terms of, I just have a few things. Kirstin, I don't want you to lose your.
I won't.
Okay. All right. So one is that for City University, we belong to a union. So that's very important to acknowledge because that's what really Tony was alluding to. Some of the reasons why they can't do certain things is because of the union. We're not in a right to work state. The offer is not going to come from the chair of the committee. You're going to have the chair is going to probably contact you, or a designee of the chair of the search committee will contact you, but about arranging coming on, and so forth. But that's not the person to talk to about the offer. The dean will make the offer. and you negotiate with the dean. So you have to wait till you get the offer, okay? Second, in that offer, don't shortchange yourself. Ask for startup money. I asked for $15,000 to $20,000 to start up. Right, so don't shortchange yourself. And I didn't want the PC, I wanted a Mac. I wanted hard drives, so you have a list ready to go. The other thing is in terms of...
So that's money that you would get one time only
yes,
at the beginning?
to start up, right.
Yeah, and the startup relates to
research.
To your research, to help you get started in your scholarship career.
Right.
You know, yeah, you've had a career at, you know, PhD program in urban ed, but most of your scholarship there went to your dissertation. Now you take the skills you learned, and maybe you'll continue with the work you did in dissertation, but now they want you, particularly any good four-year college, they want you to now build your scholarship career. So you need money to travel, you need money to buy equipment, you need money for different things. So that's what Wesley spoke about when he says startup money.
Then also, the first thing you want to understand is the difference between a community college and the difference between a four-year college, and within the four-year college, the difference between a research-run institution or institution that's more a teaching university, not teaching necessarily in just education, but teaching in terms of that's their main focus, and be careful of the middle one. The middle one are wannabe universities. Universities that want to be research-run institution, but give you a load that's a community college load. And the load would be, for community colleges, usually for CUNYs, with 27 credits, and that's a like four class per semester. That's an incredible load for a full-time faculty that have to produce scholarship and do all of that. So really think, and sometimes in the job announcement, the load is on there, right? So you can take a look. But that's the key, the load. And the job talk, and then I'll hand it over to Kirstin. I would say there are 3 or 4 types of job talk. Okay, there's the job talk that you go in, yes, you're going to talk in front of the committee, and then probably they're going to invite some other faculty and some students, and you're going to do, and plan for more. If just they say a job talk and not teaching, make sure that it's research-based. Not that, okay, I'm going to be cursory about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my teaching, a little bit about this. It is, because they're looking for research-based, are you tenurable? And that means, are you going to be able to produce or have a strong research agenda? The other talk that you're going to have is the 2-minute talk. For instance, when I came, I had my talk, had the job talk, then everyone's running around. Oh, the provost couldn't come, the associate dean couldn't come. Oh, here goes the associate dean down the hall. Let's come. So I had 3 minutes with the associate dean, and I had a 3-minute job talk in my mind. So you have to be prepared for all of those contingencies.
Okay, so just a couple of things that I want to add. I'm furiously jotting here. So just to build on what Wesley was saying, another thing is to just know the university, which can be tricky, especially if you're going different places. By the 3rd time, I was kind of like, wait a minute, did I see that? Wait, which campus? Because I'm also then looking at all the campus websites for the places that didn't contact me, which were many. But that's another thing that's important. And also just how to find job listings was a little bit of a mystery to me, because we all know about the Chronicle, and there are other places online if you just put in, higher ed jobs. But I actually found the New Paltz listing by just going, I was like, Hudson Valley, that's a place that it's nearby-ish, as a region. And so I just started looking for schools in the Hudson Valley, going to their HR pages on their websites, and found a bunch of listings that way that hadn't popped up in other searches. So that's another tactic. But as far as the documents that you need to think about preparing, and I realize some of this is a little premature, but obviously the letter of application, that's pretty standard, your CV. Oftentimes there'll be a request for any publication copies that you've put together. Sometimes a teaching philosophy, which is usually a couple-page statement about, like what I was talking about before too with BI, that really guides my teaching philosophy. But as teachers, we have this sort of privilege of thinking about teaching all the time, so I don't think that will come as much of as a difficult exercise as for us as it might be for someone who is in another discipline and not teaching or thinking about teaching in the same way that we do. And also sometimes institutions will ask you to devise a sample syllabus, which I was actually surprised by, but there can be many other things. Key assessments can be asked for, those sorts of documents. And the last thing that I just wanted to, I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I want to make sure other people get a chance. Make sure other people proofread your letters and CV. Send them around. I had no shame and sent it to like 20 of my best friends and was so glad that I did because I sent a pretty clean document off. And then, two more things, actually, I lied. One, what is a job talk? I think it's important, Wesley said that it's about your research, but I based mine off of my dissertation, and generally that's what people do when they're coming right out of a graduate program. And lastly, I had developed a digital CV right before I went on my first interview, so I bought KirstinGreen.net and I mapped it to a WordPress site, and so I have a digital presence that it was great to be able to put at the signature of my emails when I was sending around and at the top of my CV, and that was impressive to some of the committees. I think the institution that hired me will be looking to me to some extent to fill the digital gap in the program there as well. And so that's something that I would love to leave as a, I want to say relic, but I'm at a loss for words at the end of today, but with our program is I would love, after having gone through this experience so recently, some sort of, what is the word, artifact or digital artifact or something just about the experience and what I learned, and maybe some samples of things that might be useful to other people coming through the program.
Yeah, let me make some comments here because I think a lot of important things have been said. I think the last point that Kirstin mentioned in terms of she developed her kind of digital presence, and we're at a point, and this goes back to what we were talking about in the first hour, the importance of technology. There's still a lot of schools out there that want to do more with the technology, and the more you can demonstrate it, and this was not necessarily a subtle way, but in some ways, you know, Kirstin saying, I'm very comfortable with technology. Here's my CV and whatever, my presence and what have you. And that might have been a very important technique that was helpful for her. Let me make a couple of other comments. I'm going to distribute, and actually you should know, this is out on the Urban Ed website, but this is a little box score of where we are with our graduates. For those of you who don't know, our program only started in 2001, so it isn't as if we produced hundreds and hundreds of graduates. But this is a little box score. We've had 79 graduates so far. That does not include the people for this year. I'll talk about them in a minute. But of the 79 graduates, 55 are in positions where they're teaching in colleges and universities. So 7 out of 10 of you will very likely get a position in teaching. Now that doesn't mean that the other 30%, did not get the job. The other 30% are making decisions to do other things for the most part. There are several people who are of the 20 who are not working in academic positions. They may be doing work like in a New Visions for New Schools, where they're doing policy work for one of the government agencies, State Education Department, Department of Education. Some of them are teachers in schools making a very, very good salary. We have a couple of people who are high school teachers who are making over $100,000 a year as high school teachers, and they don't necessarily want to now take a job as a $60,000 a year assistant professor. So we have a couple of people who've decided to work in not profit, but in some ways lucrative paying positions. So those other 20 individuals are not necessarily people who went into the job market to be assistant professors and were turned down. Some of them are making a conscientious decision that they're going to do something else. And there's 4 people we don't know about, or actually we don't know what they're doing in terms of their occupation. So that gives you a little sense of what we're doing in the program, and you can feel fairly confident that the majority of our students are getting jobs in academia as assistant professors. The other thing I wanted to say, which some of you heard me say this, I've said this to several of you as individuals, what is your strength when you apply for a position to a school like New Paltz? And I'll give you some other schools in a minute. But to me, those of you who've had experience teaching in the public schools, and several of you have, I think many of you have, that is golden. That's very, very important, right? You're applying for a position, you know, teach secondary social studies, teach early childhood, teach special education, teach English language learners, but you're called in for an interview, they're going to see PhD in urban education. So those schools are interested somehow in urban education. It isn't as if there are hundreds of urban education PhD programs. There's probably no more than a dozen, you know, if that many, right? So somehow that PhD in urban education had an appeal. Many of you, your experiences are as public school teachers in New York City or maybe some other urban environment. That's very valuable. And the other thing is, almost all of you who come into our program, not with one or two exceptions, we require you to have a master's degree in a content field. Science education, English language learning, special ed, social studies, etc. That is important too. And then what we did in the urban education program is hopefully we've given you the scholarship skills, the research skills. And you put that package together, experience working in schools, content knowledge, you have undergraduate, graduate, master's degrees in content areas, and then you've developed the scholarship and research skills in the PhD program in urban education. And be proud of the fact that it took you 5, 6, 7 years to get through this program. That's a very important element because it separates us from the 3-year EDD program, right? You can go and get an EDD program, and I say this almost 3 times a week to somebody, usually prospective students. I say, why are you coming into this program? And if it's because they want to be a doctor of this or whatever, I says, Seton Hall has a 3-year online degree program. Go there. You'll be an EDD program. You'll have a doctor in front of your name in 3 years. Do it. For us, the average length of time is 5 to 6 years. And that's something to be proud of. Because it isn't by accident we're doing this. We're doing it because that's what we think we do well. It builds quality into our program. But you already have, almost all of you already have 2 elements before you come into this program. You're teaching in New York City schools, which, you know, sometimes it's frustrating and hard, but it gives you a lot of experience that's important as you go and apply for positions as an assistant professor. The other thing is your content knowledge. I mean, you know, your positions, you almost all of you are fully certified in some content area, and you've got them in fine schools, et cetera, et cetera. So those things are important, and you stress those as part of your interview process. Integrate those 3 things somehow into the questions. Let me just say one thing, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. I've given you the data for the 71 graduates through this year, which we're very proud of. We'll have about 12 graduates in May at the end of this year. And let me just say, of them, 6 already have positions as in some kind of college and what have you. 1 will be working at Queensborough Community College. Rachel Lambert will be working at Chapman University in California. She was a finalist at Stanford University. She did not get it, but we're proud of her. Kirstin Cole is a finalist at Borough Manhattan Community College. Amber Pabone has offered and accepted a position at the University of Pittsburgh. Kirstin has a position at SUNY New Paltz. Heather Woodley just accepted a position at NYU. So our students are getting accepted. And again, feel confident about that. I don't see the market drying up completely in 3 years. And as I said to Jeremy, we had lunch together. I'm happy to be the executive officer in this program because most of our students are getting jobs. If I was in one of the humanities areas, and I hear this from my fellow executive officers, the jobs aren't there. And I would feel, you know, I would feel almost guilty. I'm having students, I'm building relationships with students for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And if they can't get a job, I would not feel right. I couldn't do it. But fortunately, we're in a field where there's still demand for your skills, and you should feel confident that a lot of your predecessors have gone through this and have gotten jobs. I mean, we have Wesley here, who's fine model for our program. But I'll mention other Chris Emden, who's at Columbia Teachers College. By the way, I told you that our program started in 2001, and so while we have what's 50 some odd students out in the field, it takes 6, 7, 8 years to get tenure. So we're just now getting some of our former students who have been in the field for a while up for tenure. Chris, I believe, is the first.
He got tenure and promotion.
He got tenure promotion at Columbia. So he went from assistant to associate professor and tenure. So that's where we're following that next level of accomplishment on the part of our students. Something else that Kirstin said that was incredibly important, that is, and I advise all the students this, you can't say that I'm going to stay in New York City, because you limit yourself too much. As big as New York City is, as dynamic as it is, as the number of colleges here and fine colleges and universities that we have here, you're limiting yourself if you're saying you're going to stay in New York City. You may get a job. We have about a dozen of our students in CUNY colleges. We have one at NYU, one at Columbia, one at Mercy College. Zoila Tazi got a position last year at Mercy College. And I think that's about it. And we have about a dozen in CUNY colleges, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, York, Medgar Evers, etc. But I mentioned Rachel Lambert. Rachel is working in California and in Chapman University. And we've had some wonderful, wonderful appointments. Jessica Ruggless is at McGill University in Canada, which is one of the probably among the top 6, 7 colleges, universities in North America. Chris Emden is at Columbia. Who else? Who?
Nelson.
Oh yeah, Nelson got a position at Penn. And so we have not only quantity of students going out there and getting positions, we're getting some positions at some very fine universities. So feel confident. I'm saying this not to wear a badge of pride, but feel confident that you are in a program that will give you the skills to apply for positions, and you have every right to apply for them, and you should feel confident about it. But you have to work at it. You can't, I applied and the interview didn't go good. Well, then apply again. Keep applying. That's how you get the experience. Kirstin said, I was so nervous. Well, yeah, the first time you're going to be nervous. The second time you're going to be nervous. The third time you might be nervous. But then that nervousness starts subsiding. You start expecting, they'll ask this question, that question, etc.
So you realize you can enjoy it too.
And you can
get
enjoy it.
wined and dined, and it's flown places, and it doesn't happen every day.
Let me ask any questions about that or whatever. But if not, Wesley has sat on a lot of search committees, and so Wesley, maybe you can share some insight from someone who's chaired some searches.
I think, in terms of search committees, and I'll tie this into what you said about the urban ed degree, because many times established faculty don't know how to interpret the urban ed degree. It says urban ed, and they're looking for someone to teach, let's say, in TESOL or science. So what they may be looking for, a chemist, biochemist, whatever. So what you really need to do is to be able to say, yes, a PhD in urban education, and maybe right under that on your CV, or very near where that PhD is written on there, make sure that you have that kind of secondary discipline that you're coming out of, because they're going to be looking at that. And what I found, there were several students applying for some positions in my department, and I really needed to take the time out to explain to them the program, what the urban education program meant. Because, for instance, you're coming out of Michigan. Michigan has the mathematics education. They have TESOL. So it's different and it's generic. And so I think also with the search committee, one thing is if you go into a school, for instance, Lehman has what they call a framework for their School of Education. It's called the LUT. Know it. Go online. It's there. It's there for you to read. Ask about it. Have a conversation about it. The next thing I think I wrote down was to think about that statement. And so in terms of the statement, the tenure statement, that's not tenure statement, but it's the statement that perhaps could be, that is part of your job package. So that statement is not only going to talk about your teaching, but it will also talk about your research agenda. What I did was I developed that statement pretty much a year before I was on the job market. And 7 years later now, it's turned into my tenure statement. I've worked on it for that long, and it's now 10 single-space pages. It started as maybe 4 double-space when I sent it out.
What did you call it when you sent it out?
I gave it a title, something like Understanding Science Education in the Urban Environment. And then you just give it a nice title and you chunked it that way. But the reason why I'm saying this, I'm going to say this to Kirstin too. When you touch your first feet on the ground at your university, you're going to have to put in what is called an annual review every year. They're going to want your publications and everything, because you get reappointed every year. Just because you're there, there's a mistake that you get hired to the university and it's like a regular job and I'm here. You get reappointed technically every single year and evaluated. Your evaluation goes from the department level, then up to the school level, then it goes maybe up to this faculty senate level. Every so often, then you get what is called a decanal review from your dean, maybe twice in the time you start to your tenure. And you have to ask, am I on a 7-year tenure clock? Am I on a 5-year tenure clock? I came in initially, the first cohort, on a 7-year tenure clock. So I'm going up for tenure and promotion now. And so what happens with that statement becomes very important, and being able to know that you'll be filling out what is called your annual review. And so the first thing that's on your annual review, at least with my college, is not teaching. It's how many publications have you had. And so that's what you really have to get moving on, is those publications. Don't wait. Because it may take one publication that I had took 3 years to get through, right? And so it's not something that you can say, okay, in 6 months I can get one through. So, and I think that's important to think about also.
Kirstin.
Sorry, I'm glued to my seat now. And just to build on that a little bit more, as we were having this conversation, I was thinking what you do when you go and apply for a job and you go and you sit down and you say, oh yeah, that thing on the website. You wouldn't say that thing on the web, but for instance, to give you an example, at SUNY New Paltz, the Hudson Valley writing project is housed in the university. A member of my committee was very much involved in the New York City writing project in New York City, actually at Lehman College, for many, many years. And so that was something immediately that piqued my interest when I saw the listing. And I hope very much to be involved in that now that I'm going to the institution. But it's like when we look at a website and we're getting ready for an interview, it's like we're building schema as we would with our students in the classroom, right? You want to look at connections and be making connections with the university, imagining yourself there, but in an authentic way, right? The search committees can sort of smell it when they're like, I interviewed out in Oregon, and when they said, how are you feeling about making a transition out here? I had to be very honest. I mean, it was a little overwhelming. There's some family out there, and I wouldn't have applied if I wasn't interested. But anyway, I was just thinking about that. And then lastly, with publications, depending on whether or not you're at a Research One institution or a teaching institution, different things count as publications too. For instance, if you write a grant and it doesn't get funded, sometimes that will count as scholarship. Not a publication necessarily, but under the scholarship umbrella. Before I had said scholarship, service, and teaching were sort of the 3 components of what are looked at in your application. And I just wanted to throw that out there too, because there are different requirements depending on whether or not your institution.
I would be careful of that too.
I would be very careful with calling things
scholarship.
Yeah.
That's what I
was
Let me make a comment on that. It's a great comment, and we're getting a little. Kyla, do you want to say something? No. Let me say, I was on the most college faculty departments will have something equivalent, what they call a personnel and budget committee. P&B committee, and it's usually, they're elected by the faculty in each department. They basically review the credentials of the faculty and the annual reviews, which Wesley was alluding to. Usually there are minimally 2 tools in the annual review. That is a student evaluation of each of your courses, which typically is done with some kind of multiple choice form. And then there's usually a faculty observation, a peer observation by another faculty member who will come in and sit in your class from anywhere from an hour to the full lesson. And he or she is generally required to write that up, present it to you mainly, and discuss it with you if they want to use that as a kind of formative assessment. If they use it just as a summative assessment, all you do is sign it, yes, there's no, there are no errors of fact in this observation. But departments that use it as a formative assessment, that is to help you get better, usually the faculty member who observed it will say something, supporting things that worked out well, maybe being cautious about things that did not work so well. So that is an important part of what you'll be evaluated, how well you teach. Usually there's 2 tools, a student evaluation and a peer review or peer observation. The other thing, depending upon what kind of institution you're in, the scholarly record has to you start building that relatively quickly. Now, in a community college, and I mentioned to you 2 of our students will be working in community colleges. There, the emphasis is very much on the teaching. Wesley said earlier that the teaching load in the community college is usually much heavier than the teaching load in a 4-year college, and much than a research institution or a wannabe research institution. So, and if you're in a community college environment, you need to pay attention to your teaching. You'll do a lot of it. But the recognition on the part of the administration is that because you do so much teaching, your expectation of scholarship is somewhat lower than if you were in a 4-year college. In a 4-year college, they should have some kind of written statement in terms of what you'll be evaluated on. There'll be teaching of some sort. There will be scholarship. And they should define what are the artifacts that qualify as good scholarship. I'll come back to that in a minute. And third, there's something usually called service. Service means you provided some particular important service to the department. You sat on a critical committee that took up a lot of your time. Grantsmanship might come under that, but grantsmanship is one of those things that could be something in service, because if you got a grant, you may bring in some money into the department. And if you applied for the grant, it may have taken a good deal of time, particularly if it's like an NSF grant or what have you, which it's recognized that you spent a lot of time on this. It's great if you get it. If you don't get it, well, you're not penalized for it. But frequently, grantsmanship would come more under service than under scholarship.
Maybe that's what I was thinking.
Okay, but usually colleges have those 3, teaching, scholarship, and service, as the framework for your evaluation and for moving forward. In a community college, teaching is the most important. In a 4-year college, it tends to scholarship being the most important. What is scholarship? You write a book, that's considered like, the home run. If you write a book that, that isn't published through Vanity Press or whatever. Articles in referee journals, that means that the article has been submitted and it isn't a journal that prints anything. It's a journal that has peers that review what you've written, probably ask for revisions, and then they finally publish it. Some number of those become important anyway. I would say for an assistant professor, 4 to 6, 8 over the course of 4 or 5, 6 years, something like that. But those are the kinds of things that are scholarships. So I think when you said writing a grant, Wesley and I both said, whoa. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
And not that it counts as a journal at all. But,
Yeah.
But yeah.
But go ahead.
But what it is, why I said, well, be careful, is because part of, you want to show that you have a sort of competency and professionalism. So, for instance, there was an issue where some people were telling me, oh yes, put your NCATE report under scholarship. And I looked at them, I was like, come on. So what I'm saying is that know what scholarship is. And so if you go and you put foolishness up in scholarship, you're going to be judged. Okay, you know, you're going to be judged that way. So really be strict about it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I would say there's typically three things that are solid scholarship, that belong in scholarship but not anyplace else. One is definitely if you write a book of any sort, and some of you may take your dissertations and try and convert it into a book, fine. Mark Wolfmeyer, how many of you know Mark? He's cohort 7. He just got he graduated last year. He's teaching at Muhlenberg College or University in Pennsylvania. He just got a contract for his dissertation. So that's a possibility. That is understood as something important. Articles in referee journals are important, and they generally considered scholarship. The other thing is presentations at national and international conferences. The broader the conference, the more respect it has. But those three activities.
Book chapters, though, Tony.
And book chapters, right?
Book chapters.
If you're if someone is doing an edited book, and they welcome book chapters are welcomed as part of that also.
What about reviews of books?
That's considered a minor kind of thing, you know. It goes in there, but it's more of the filler than it is, you know, the substantive item. Yeah.
And it also depends, you know, what if it's you be the judge. If it's I have something that's called other, so I'll have the book chapters, the articles, and so forth. But then I have something called the other, and it's just like it's something like it's 3-page here or something like that. That's where I put there, so that it signals that I know what's what, and that I want them to take the CV very seriously, and I think that's important.
There's an area which we've touched upon, which I think plays into this issue of what is scholarship, and that is what I would call creative works, which if you're teaching, you know, an area, particularly if you're teaching, let's say, music education or arts education, it's understood that you may do some kind of creative work, you know, a show of your work at some small gallery or whatever. That's understood. If you're in the other, let's say, you know, the non-arts area, like social studies, language, you know, what constitutes a creative work? Well, nothing. Well, actually, it could. If you do some kind of stuff on you know, you build a website that is some kind of resource for whatever it is for your area, that could be listed as a creative work. I would not hold my whole tenure on that, but it could be listed on that. And I remember when I went up for full professor, I'll say 91 or so, you're teaching in special ed. Tom McIntyre is still teaching. He and I went up as full professor together. And what was interesting, we both had, although I was in my main area was at leadership, we both had technology-related creative works. Tom had built this whole thing. What's his specialty? Is it autism or learning disabilities? Behavior. We built this whole wonderful website on behavior issues, and he had so many people visiting it, you know, every month or whatever. And so it was part of his presentation. I did a simulation for history on if you remember, the Irish immigration and if any of you have seen the gangs of New York, that story, we did a whole, myself, Steve Breyer, and a couple of our colleagues, but I took the lead on it, a whole simulation of that period of New York, where we got a lot of artifacts, we put it up electronically, et cetera, et cetera. We had a grant from IBM, and so that was part. Now, I thought that was the most interesting thing I did. But if I wanted to get my tenure on that, I never would have gotten tenure. I also had a book I wrote that was the anchor. So those kinds of things are interesting. If you have any doubt about this, any doubt about what you're doing before you're going to invest months or more, talk to your chair and ask him or her, you know, in terms of scholarship, I have this great idea for whatever. If she says, no, don't waste 9 months on that, then don't waste 9 months on that. And it depends upon the nature really of your P&B, the faculty who will evaluate your work, and most colleges will have a P&B that evaluates your work, usually 5 to 7 members.
The P&B is the most powerful committee in your department, because if they don't vote for you for tenure, your packet's not really going anywhere else.
It's not going, it stops.
It stops right there. So also I want to talk about the schools like Drexel University now are asking faculty when they go up for tenure to put together, it's called a box. So it's really a file box of that puts all your scholarship in there and your grants or whatever. But now what they're asking for is it to be in the form of an e-portfolio. So they're moving towards that too. So just be mindful of that, it's good to, what I went through was that at the middle of my second year, I was told, get your box together. So I put my box together, and that box was evaluated, and that's the box that I built for the last 4 years after that. That's the box I'm gonna get ready to submit. So I think that that's important. You don't want to do that. Your box is not something, your box for tenure is not something that you want to do a month before. It's something that you're just going to take you a good year to 6 months to put together. Probably you should be putting it together in stages. And that's the best thing that you can do. And do it without someone having to tell you. There usually is, they give you, from day one, they should give you, this is what you need to do to get tenure. And part of that is the structure of your box. Be proactive and ask your chair, could you help me, guide me through putting together my box sooner than later.
What I'd like to do, and we have planned this for 2 hours, so we have about 8 or 9 minutes left, but I'll stay here as long as anyone has any questions, and you're free to, hang around and ask me any questions with the group or one-on-one. I did want to set aside a few minutes. There's several of you here who will be, you're doing your fellowships in September. I mean, Carly, you're doing it, and Ferlazita? Yeah, you'll be doing it at Queens. Carly, you're at Hunter. Alexandra, you're not no, okay. So do you have any questions about what you might be doing next year? I mean, you're not applying for a position by virtue of the fact that we gave you a fellowship. You're going to be, I don't know if you're teaching for the first time at the college level, but you now will be teaching a course next semester at Queens or Hunter. Do you have any questions at all about the process? What you have to be doing? You'll be contacted, if you haven't already, by your chair of the department. He or she will probably sit down with you anytime between now and July to say, okay, what do you think you can teach, which is important. You don't want to teach something that you have no idea, and you should be honest. You feel you can teach whatever your strengths are. They will understand if you're working. Do you work full-time as a teacher? No. No, okay. Carly, you're working part-time as a teacher. So they'll respect those schedules. They'll respect the fact that you have to take a couple of courses with us, and our courses are in the evening. So they'll try and work around your schedule. But also keep in mind that they have needs, and they're paying for your services. And the way it works out is actually right now there are, let's say if an adjunct costs $4,500 a course, what they're providing is the college provides $1,500, the Graduate Center provides $1,500, and the City University Central Office Space provides $1,500. So in some ways, they're spending less on you than if they were to hire an adjunct. And typically, the courses you're going to teach, if you weren't there, they would be taught by an adjunct, most likely. So they're not going to give you, the best courses, because most of those are going to be reserved for the full-time faculty. But they will respect your schedule. They will try and give you a course that they feel you can teach. They don't want you to teach something that you don't know anything about. So that's important. So when you have that appointment with your chair, you can tell him or her. What department are you in, Carly?
Curriculum teaching.
So that would be Jenny Tootin. What department will you be in? What is it?
Queens College.
You know what department you'll be in?
It's called youth.
Yeah, secondary. That's a secondary.
Okay. That isn't. Who do you know who's the chair?
Yeah.
Eleanor.
Eleanor.
Thomas.
Thomas.
Okay. I don't know her, but when you meet with them, be honest what you think you can teach, and they will try and accommodate you as best they can, because they don't want you to have a bad experience. They don't want their students to have a bad experience. So think about what it is you think you can teach and what it is you want to teach. but keep in mind that you have to meet their needs also. And for the most part, you'll be treated as an adjunct. Whatever services they provide, the copying services, a place to hang your coat, whatever, you'll be provided with that. You'll be expected to have counseling sessions with your students. If you should get a key course, it's possible, a key assessment course. Make sure we talked about that earlier. Make sure you know what the assessments are. Be proactive. I think Kyla gave a good suggestion there earlier. Kyla, you just started, right? This is your. Can you want to share anything about that first semester and how you end up teaching whatever you were teaching?
Sure. So I knew David Connor already, who's the head of the department, which was helpful for me, but I think that it's really also helpful to get to know whoever the person in the office is that does all the administrative stuff, because they will help you. Yeah, so they will help you a lot. What else? So I would ask for whoever is the expert in whatever course that you're teaching, so that you can get their syllabus, and then revise it as you see fit to make it fit you and what you can do. But it helps to have that to start with. I guess that's about it as far as advice. It's it's fun. Yeah.
I just want to handling difficult students
Oh,
in your
yeah.
class
Oh.
and grades, and be careful about giving out incompletes, because what happens is that they'll come hunt you down to complete this course and so forth. So those things. So just be mindful of those things. Also, at Lehman, we have the chair, but we have program coordinators. So I'm a program coordinator for science ed. So, okay, your first contact with the department will be the chair, but really it's the program coordinator that runs that cluster. And our clusters are run as mini departments. So be aware of that.
Two things I would add about the syllabus is I got multiple syllabi, so maybe multiple professors have taught the same class. So then you can look at several of those and see maybe you like some better than others. And then also and also to support what you're saying about getting to know whoever the administrative support person is in the office. Having that relationship has been really, really important to me and really helpful. And also just she's been really helpful in getting me desk copies. So if there's a a text you're thinking about doing and you don't want to buy it yourself, I've done that multiple times and gotten a bunch of books that way. Some of which I ended up teaching in my class, others which I didn't. That I didn't have to use my own money for, which was nice.
Keep attendance. Keep attendance, because if you go through a grade appeal, and I'm the one that adjudicates lots of grade appeal, where the professor didn't do this, I came, I didn't come, and all of that, you need to keep those records. They're going to call on your records to adjudicate the grade appeal.
So just one other thing is that the student body at CUNY is really diverse, right? And I don't know, maybe partially because I'm in special ed, also I have a lot of students who have disabilities, and so the accessibility office at Hunter has been really helpful for me in terms of getting them the services that they need, and being in touch with them has been a good resource. So.
One thing I would say that because we have enough students now and actually I see natural pairs here. Carly, if you have any questions, you might want to talk to Kyla, since she's at Hunter. You might want to talk to Kareem, although it's a different department, right? You're teaching physics. Yeah.
But Ashraf Shady is.
Oh, that's right. Ashraf Shady.
And Lynn Augustine, who graduated, kind of like a co-graduation between here and chemistry, are in the elementary ed.
Right.
And they run those two programs and are very familiar with everything.
Yeah. So they're graduates of our program. Thank you, Wesley. So you have colleagues there, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to help you with any of that. Kareem.
Can I suggest one more thing for those of you going?
Sorry. I'm going to suggest one more thing for those of you new. I've been an adjunct now for 20 years at Queens, and I've seen the transition of getting Blackboard and all the technology. Take advantage of the Office of Information Technology, OIT. They offer courses how to use Blackboard. You also want to take advantage of Center for Learning, I think, Teaching and Learning. I know at Queens we have Eva Fernandez. Oh man, she's amazing. And I know that sometimes I just walk over. I said, I just need a little help. And I've transitioned from the old way of doing it and embrace technology. And I put things on Blackboard, the grades, and you really want to be comfortable with that. As Dr. Picciano mentioned earlier, communication with the students is very important. In the modern university, you're connected all the time. My cell phone is connected. As soon as I get emails or texts, emails, whatever, I know what's going on. And so these two things, use the resources. OIT to train on using the entire Microsoft suite, using Blackboard. Clickers is another very big component of the modern classroom. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It has transformed my lecture. I mean, my lecture is about 116 students, and it's transformed the lecture hall into something that's very interactive. We know the attention span, of any student. It's like, all right, 7 to 10 minutes, you could lecture, but you want to break that up. So I break it up with clickers, put on some questions, and make a lecture hall very dynamic. You break that old style of lecture. You stand there, the way we went through school. You sit there for 2 hours, put toothpicks in your eyes, and just to keep. It doesn't work anymore. It's no longer lecture. It's very interactive. Just communicate with technology. It's constant communication. So you really want to take advantage of what OIT and Center for Teaching and Learning does throughout CUNY.
Okay, I'm going to finish up now, but I'll continue. I'll hang out here. Quick.
Just to add onto that, there's so many digital initiatives happening right here in this building too, and there are the platform that I built my digital CV off of was Open CUNY. They're also through the Academic Commons, and there's just so much opportunity for learning more in that realm here.
Okay, I'm going to finish up now. I just want to give you a quick story. My first adjunct position was in 1971 at Borough Manhattan Community College, when it was all rental facilities like on 6th Avenue and what have you. And I used to teach, actually back then they had a data processing department. I used to teach computer programming, among other things. Tuesday, and I liked it because there was a laboratory assigned with it, so one course was 6 hours. So as an adjunct with a young family, I used to make 6 hours of pay, and back then we used to get paid once a month. So I had this big check every month. It was incredible. But one thing I liked, which I see sometimes and we encourage among our students here, it was a pretty big department, and Tuesday night and Thursday night I used to teach, but after our Thursday night class, 4 or 5 of us would go and have a drink at the Hotel Taft. And I still remember that as some of the nicest times in my career. We used to go, they used to have a piano bar and they used to play music. And Thursday night we'd go and have a couple of drinks. And it was incredible camaraderie because it was all young people, Some of us I didn't have a doctorate at the time. I had a master's, I didn't have a doctorate, but we were all just starting off on our career and we had just someone to talk to. I love it when I hear that some of you guys in our cohort used to have a Thursday night, what did you call it, Thursday night drink or something?
Thursday, we would do it on Thursday. Yeah.
Thursday. Let me tell you, those informal things are wonderful. You should try, and if it's happening, participate. If it's not happening, try and start it, because as much as you may talk to the chair or the program coordinator, for all the official formal information, the bond you build with your colleagues, you'll remember, in my case, 40 years later. So enjoy it. Anyhow, thank you for your attention. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. I want to give a special thank you. Wesley came down from Lehman College. Wesley, thank you. You were wonderful. Kirstin, congratulations. You did. We're very proud of you, and we're going to be proud of all the rest of you. Kareem, congratulations on your Adjunct of the Year at Queens College. That's no small feat. They probably have about 500 or 600 adjuncts at Queens College. And I also want to thank Jennifer and Kyla for helping with all the logistics. I thank our video technicians for coming down and spending this time with us. So I'll hang around for a few more minutes, as long as you want, actually. There's still wine and cheese and whatever here, so enjoy yourselves.